So we can see that early childhood music makes a difference. And one reason why music was taken out of the schools is because our educational hierarchy emphasizes mathematics at the top, languages, humanities, and the arts at the bottom. And of course, the arts is the colorful, but yet and still, this white symbolizes that there's a connection to the arts in all of these. That arts also has its own hierarchy. At the top of the hierarchy is, of course, art itself, visual arts, sculpture, music in second place, theater, and then dance. Now, if you notice, in terms of color coordination and color coding, there's, in theater, for example, you have set design, which is art. In theater and musical theater, you have dance and you have music. So it's an inter-relativity. In dramatic theater, when a director talks about pacing a performance or pacing a phrase, what do they talk about? They say, give it a beat, right? It's musical terminology. Or they talk about coloring a phrase with the way that the phrase is spoken. Or tone. And there's also structure and order in the theatrical writing that's similar to the construction of a composition with a beginning, middle, and end. And so we've got to now think about, well, how do you relate art and music? Miles Davis, when we were working together, you know, he was recovering from a stroke. And part of his therapy was painting. I don't know if any of you have seen his paintings, but actually I'm wearing one of his paintings today. The necktie. These neckties were released by Marshall Fields back in the late 80s, or early 90s, I think. And so he was at his place, and I was there, and we were talking about music, and he was working on about 5 canvases. And he told me that music is a painting that you can hear, and a painting is music you can see. And at the time, I thought that was really profound. And although at the time I didn't paint, I barely draw stick figures. But he told me that it was not only relaxing, but that the music informed his art and vice versa. So exposure to the arts has the potential of doing that. Now, this is I don't know how many of you have heard of the Fibonacci spiral. Okay, so it's basically a series of numbers that the way it works is 1 plus 1 is 2, and 2 plus 3 is 5, and 5 plus 8 is 13, and so on. And in nature, this has been shown to be what we call the golden mean, or pi in mathematics and geometry. So it's used in mathematics and geometry, of course, and it's used in architecture. So it's very prominent in architecture. And it exists in nature as a spiral, sort of starting from a center and going out and symmetrically into the spiral. And so in music, of course, the implications are pretty vast, because we deal with overtones in music. When we hear a note on the piano, we don't hear a C, we hear a C, and it starts to subdivide and create these overtones that just keep going into infinity, similar to this Fibonacci spiral. So this is just to kind of convey the interconnectivity of the arts that we got to get back to the understanding that they're not really separate things. How many know the name Gillian Lynn? Nobody? Okay, I bet you all know about her work. Her story is this. When she was a little girl, she was very fidgety. She was very hyperactive, and her mother took her to the doctor. She was born in Great Britain, in London. And the mother sat with the doctor, with Jillian in the room, and explained the problems she was having in school. No focus, lack of attention. And so the doctor said, okay, can I just have a few minutes with Jillian alone? So the mother went out of the room. And the doctor went over to his radio and turned it on. And Jillian started to move around and started to shake and dance. So he called the mother back into the room and they watched her dance. He said, there's nothing wrong with your daughter. She's a dancer. Put her in a dance class. So she was enrolled into dance school. And she, of course, excelled in dance, but all of her grades improved. All of her hyperactivity sort of just vanished. She came to America later and hooked up with Andrew Lloyd Webber. She was the choreographer for the longest running play on Broadway, Cats. Phantom of the Opera. She started her own music school, dance school. She's still alive, she's still with us, a multi-millionaire. If born today, would be on Ritalin. So, how many of our kids right now on various meds simply need another outlet, a way to express themselves, a way to express that urge for creative expression? You know, we have a tendency to focus on those academics and pound it into their heads and drum it into their heads without giving them any breather, any way to express themselves otherwise. And so we've created sort of a society of non-thinkers. We all know that jazz, especially, fosters critical thinking, thinking out of the box, free association, because as an improviser, when you get on stage, every time you pick up your instrument or set up your instrument to improvise a solo, you're sort of taking a risk. You don't know how it's going to come out because it's a spontaneous kind of free expression, although it's within the structure and it's informed by certain knowledge. But it absolutely fosters a sense of free thinking, as it were. And a good example of the way our thinking has become more and more rigid, I went to Karen's Raw for a shake. And the guy at the counter took my order, and it was just a simple thing. It was a combination of things. And I noticed that he was about to put ice in. And I just preferred not to have ice, or either to go light on the ice because I didn't want a really cold thing. This guy got really visibly shaken by my request. He got really upset. He told me that, well I've got to follow the rules. Total inflexibility. And so I thought about the movie, how many saw Men in Black? You remember the scene when they were sitting, when he was doing the application, and they were sitting in these little tiny cubicles, and he had to fill out the application, and all the applicants were like having a real problem in this cramped space trying to fill out this thing. And they were all being watched remotely with cameras. And Will Smith's character quickly got up, found a coffee table, dragged a chair over to the table, and gave himself some arm room to do the application. And so they observed that and said, we like this guy. He thinks out of the box. So that's the kind of thing that music education can do for our kids, just to help them to think out of the box. So the idea is to, with that, to kind of create more of a convergence of the academics and the arts, where they're not separate things. where they're all interconnected in many ways and all informed by the arts and music. And we, of course, know that music is mathematical. Languages. Musicians are known to do better with foreign languages because of their being able to hear tonality. Because, for example, in Europe, the tuning for all instruments in Europe is 442, 443 sometimes. The same thing in Japan. Whereas we tune 440, it's a lower tonality. So they automatically hear higher. And most European languages are spoken in a slightly higher pitched tone. American voices are much lower. So for that reason, it's harder for us to hear foreign languages. So, but for musicians, because we have the sort of the fluency, and there's a basis for this, because a friend of mine, or a friend of a friend, who lives in our neighborhood on the north side, she has done a study, and she's shown basically that when you learn music at an early age, her name is Nina Kraus. I'm going to read her statement. Musical experience has a pervasive effect on the nervous system. Our recent articles show that lifelong musical experience enhances neural encoding of speech as well as music and heightens audiovisual interaction. Our work suggests that musicians have a specialized neural system for processing sight and sound in the brainstem, the neural gateway to the brain. This evolutionary ancient part of the brain was previously thought to be unmalleable. However, our studies indicate that music, a high-order cognitive process, affects automatic processing that occurs early in the processing stream and fundamentally shapes cortical sensory circuitry. So in short, what she's saying is that when music is learned at an early age, that it contributes to the actual formation of brain circuitry. So that means that if there's no early childhood music education, that there's certain neurological development that doesn't happen at all. And so we kind of wait for these studies to filter down and trickle down into legislation, which can take forever. But we've got to start doing something now. Mark Ruffin, everybody knows who Mark Ruffin is. He's on Sirius XM every day doing the jazz show. Prior to that, he was Ramsey Lewis's producer when Ramsey was here at WNUA. And then Mark had his own show. I forgot the name of it. It was,
Miles Ahead.
Huh?
Miles Ahead.
Miles, but before that, it was a Caribbean thing.
Oh.
Well, one of Mark's jobs when he was at WNUA, one of his last jobs, in fact, was to take the solos of records that had been approved for airplay and to edit out the solos so that they could be played on the radio station.
Nice.
That's what he said. He quit his job because of this. And the reason this happened is because Broadcast Architecture, the corporation that was hired as a marketing firm and to do the demographic research, had determined that jazz solos in music was a distraction to the people that they were marketing to. And of course, Clear Channel, by that time, had gotten involved with the purchase of all these stations. And so they literally created the demise of the music, because musicians who created that kind of music, pretty soon they got the idea that, well, the only way I'm going to get airplay is not to do a solo in my tune. So they started tailoring their music to fit their marketing demographic in order to sell music, which is really dangerous for a broadcast architecture corporation to dictate our creative output. Really dangerous.